The first time was only a warning.
One, two, three!
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I am here with episode 9 of my Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 3, and this episode is going to be for a sequel to a film I reviewed for last year's season, and it was a film about a demonic possession. It was about one of those creepy kid horrors. It was one from the 70s. It was directed by Richard Donner. Of course, that film was called 1976's The Omen. This episode is going to be for 1978's the second installment of the franchise, Damian OMEN 2. This time directed by Don Taylor and not Richard Donner this time, because Richard Donner was off directing Superman. Anyway, so what's the plot of this movie? Well, 7 years later, Damien Thorne is about to turn 13 and is just discovering who he really is and what he is destined to do. Now living with his aunt, uncle, and cousin in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, Damien is in line to inherit everything from his family. Can Richard Thorne finish the job that Damien's father, Robert Thorne, started? So anyway, how was this film made? Well, David Seltzer, who wrote the first film screenplay, was asked by the producers to write the second. Seltzer refused, for he had no interest in writing sequels. Years later, he commented that he had written the story for the second Omen. He would have said it the day after the first movie, with Damien and a child living in the White House, with Seltzer turning down Omen 2. Producer Harvey Bernard duty outlined the story himself, and Stanley Mann was hired to write the screenplay. After Bernard had finished writing the story outline, he was given the green light to start the production. The first person he contacted was Jerry Goldsmith because of the composer's busy schedule. Bernard also felt that Goldsmith's music for The Omen was the highest point of that movie, and that without Goldsmith's music, the sequel would not be successful. Goldsmith's Omen 2 score uses similar motives to his original Omen score, but for the most part, he avoided reusing the same musical cues. In fact, the first movie's famous Ayes Satani theme is used only partially. Just before the closing credits begin, Goldsmith composed a largely different main title theme for Omen 2, albeit one that utilizes Latin phrases as Ayes Satani had done. And Goldsmith's Omen 2 score allows eerie choral effects and unusual electronic sound designs to take precedence over the piano and gothic chanting. Richard Donner, who had directed the first movie, was not available to direct the second because he was working on Superman. This would be the film debut of Michelle Taylor. The official tagline for the film is, "For the first time was only a warning." Neil McKern reprises his role as Carl Burgenham from the original film. McKern is the only cast member of the series to appear as the same character in more than one installment, although actor Tommy Duggan appears in the first and third installments of the series as different characters. The film would then go on to be released on June 9, 1978, to mixed reviews from critics and fans in comparison to the critical acclaim of the first film, but managed to make a decent $26 million on a $6.5 million budget. As for my reaction, now this is not a terrible sequel per se, but it is kind of a letdown in comparison to the first one. I am an avid fan of the original Omen. I think it was everything that The Exorcist is made out to be by fans and critics all over the world. Thrilling, intriguing, and incredibly creepy. With its apocalyptic open ending, a second part could only take away from the original's ending. The truth is, this sequel is by no means as bad as it could have been. Sure, the excitement and the perfect structure of the original aren't there. Basically, this plays out like an early ancestor of the Final Destination franchise. Characters become aware of who Damien is, and from this point on, we know they're doomed and anticipate their gruesome death. Most of all, the movie is muddled with bad character development. Lance Henriksen's character, for instance, is never elaborated on, and it doesn't make him any more mysterious. It just feels incomplete. A good portion of the movie is spent with nothing much going on except for a few people dying around Damien, while he just keeps on living a completely normal life, unaware of who he is. Then all of a sudden, everything happens way too quickly. Damien finds out about his destiny and immediately accepts it. The same goes for his father, who is infuriated at first when someone suggests that his son might be seeing Spawn, only to accept the fact shortly afterwards. The final climax ending arrived just as quickly, leaving you wondering why the whole thing was so unbalanced. But the story itself is pretty good, actually. Now that Damien has been under the care of his aunt and uncle, strange things were happening again. And it seems like anyone who is getting too close to finding out the truth about Damien is getting killed in some freak accident. Now that's a very good sequel that should be given a second chance, I gotta say. In this movie, we are introduced to a whole lot of new characters who basically take the place of people in the previous film. Like William Holden and Lee Grant are the new parents this time around, plus a whole lot of other characters whose only inclusion seems to seemingly involve as many deaths as possible. What this film lacks is creativity, whereas in the original we have nice little touches like when David Warner discovers the black marks on the photographs. Here it's virtually a barren desert of ideas. Instead, the film is weighed down by a whole load of mumbo jumbo and many superfluous characters who bear little relation to the plot. Many minor folks are simply required to run around and warn of death and destruction before getting killed. And this is a formula which repeats itself through the film's lengthy running time and eventually becomes just tiring. And still, Jonathan Scott Taylor invests his evil little kid with a whole lot of menace. From brooding glares to sudden bursts of activity, Taylor enjoys many scenes he is given, such as the power game between himself and a history teacher. I even like the scene when he discovers who he is and questions his role tearfully, "Why me?" When he screams that. The scene seems to ask for a little sympathy for the character, although this is immediately evaporated after he begins to kill off all those who dare know his secret in violent and cruel ways. And as for the performances, well, William Holden lends a touch of glass as the father figure. Unfortunately, though, his role is ultimately identical to pretty much to that of Gregory Peck. Like, for example, both characters take an incredible amount of time to discover the true identity of their son, and both act way too late. And I found Lee Grant to be very shrill and annoying as Damien's mother. She is a superficial character whose role is to provide a sudden twist at the end. Along the way, there are loads of familiar, respected actors and actresses to give much needed credibility to the proceedings, as well as a disappointing turn from a young Lance Henriksen whose role is to, well, nothing as it happens. But there is some good news for gore fans. Gore fans will be happy with the various killings on offer here. And deaths are where all the creativeness lies. Like, for example, of deaths. There's people who are poisoned by toxic fumes and turn blue, have their eyes pecked out by crows, crushed by trucks and drains, fall into icy rivers, fail to get out of the ice and drown to death, or just simply collapse and die. So that should please some gore hounds right there. Now, as for bad qualities, well, since this is a pretty mediocre sequel, there are a number of bad qualities with this film. So in comes the bad qualities of the sequel. The main problem is that Damien doesn't really come under any threat whatsoever throughout the entire film. Like, seriously, no one really gets within stabbing distance. When you have instead is Damien going to school, getting surrounded by his SOLs, who share ominous looks at each other at every turn, way to avoid suspicion, right there. Anyone throughout the film who realizes that Damien may prefer Black Sabbath to Cliff Richard gets killed almost straight away without letting on to anyone, and the inner conflict that may have added to the drama of the film goes more like, "I'm a son of the devil, well, easy come, easy go, dude." And for the director Don Taylor just lacks the subtlety of Richard Donner as the director of the sequel, and he goes for a more graphically gory approach. Each death is more elaborate and bloodthirsty than the one before, like the guy getting sliced in half in the elevators, perhaps the film's gruesome highlights. As a result, this is just one of those sequels that caters more to gore fans than those who like a spooky psychological flavor to their horror films like with the first one. And basically, this movie is just pretty much exactly the same exact movie as the first one. All that is missing here is the fact that there's no question as to what Damien is, and now Damien is aware of what his purpose is. The big difference in this movie is that just anyone's watching. Like, it should be obvious something is wrong with Damien. Literally any person who questions him ends up dead, almost always right after they do the questioning. And also by the time this movie ends, Damien has pretty much taken out his entire family, much like the ending of the first movie. So there's that. So yeah, anyway. So basically, this film literally feels like this. You're just watching the first one with different characters and more gore. Except if the kid were a teenager and not some 6-year-old, like like in the first film. But however, despite that, is Damian OMEN 2 a terrible sequel? No, not really. This movie's not as terrible, but nowhere near the amazement the first movie was at all in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, may not be terrible, but it is pretty much inferior. In the end, Damian OMEN 2 is mostly just worth the watch on streaming. I guess if you just want to see what happened to Damian after the first film. Anyway, that's pretty much it for my review of Damian OMEN 2. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Damian OMEN 2, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you want to see the rest of Damian's story, then I would just stream this one on any device to save you time. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Omen 2, I'm going to give Damian the Omen 2 a 6 out of 10. There we go. That pretty much wraps up my review for Damian OMEN 2. And so you're wondering, what's going to be the next review? Well, the next review is going to be we're going back into the 2010s for the next episode. Because the next episode is going to be for the sequel to the movie I kickstarted Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 3 with. And that episode is going to be for 2013's, yeah, that dreaded freaking year again. Ugh. Insidious Chapter 2, which was, believe it or not, the first horror movie I saw in theaters. So yeah, anyway, till then guys, that will be it for this episode. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this and want to see more, then don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.